In one case, particularly around child abuse, a child may die as a result of neglect and abuse. With pedophilia, a child may not necessarily die, but a child is damaged probably for the rest of their lives as a result of that abuse. I think we should try and understand where those two differences lie. And I've got some examples of this as well. I also want to talk a little about why it is that we don't confront these issues at a national level, why it is that it's left up to the state specifically to deal with child abuse, and it seems to be left up to the federal police to deal with pedophilia. I guess the two are different in that the pedophilia stuff particularly is dealt with across the dark web and in other mysterious places where the federal government and the federal police in particular have access to whatever tools they need in order to be able to confront pedophilia. So I guess that's one of the reasons why it sits there. But on the other hand, it is something that is a state-based issue generally. And I have, for years, been complaining about the fact that we aren't able to manage this at a federal level. We seem to rely on states to do so. Now, relying on states to do this has been fraught with all sorts of danger. There was a case back in 2015-16 where a little child, a baby in fact, by the name of Ebony, was killed, murdered, even though I think the father got off on some other lesser charge. But nevertheless, the child died as a result of physical abuse. Now, this child could have been saved if the New South Wales authorities who knew about the child were aware that that parent had moved to South Australia and that their responsibility or the duty of care in New South Wales was to notify South Australia of the move and to investigate the parents and the condition of the child. However, they failed to do so. So I'm just going to bring up that case as reported in 2016 when it was taken to the coroner's inquest. And it's important for us to look at this because this is one of those cases which could have been, if notified appropriately, and if that information was transferred to another state, could have saved a child's life. Now, if this was a federal case, if the federal government was looking after this and monitoring no matter where these people were living, no matter what state they were in, or even if they moved overseas, then there would have been a spotlight on this family all the way through, no matter where they were. And again, this child's life probably would have been saved. So in the case of baby Ebony, she was, if I can just bring this up, her mother and father were aged 17 and 19 and had recently moved from New South Wales to South Australia. Now also, it's worth noting here that the mother also was a person who had been in care. And so this raises a completely another issue, which I've talked about on many occasions, is our lack of care for those people who have been traumatised through their own childhood and been traumatised simply by being in care and usually don't have appropriate parental models to look up to or adults to look up to, period, who can help them navigate their way through the early part of their adult life. And I think this is probably the case with the mother here, even though she was placed on a good behaviour bond, I think, in the end, and wasn't charged as the father was because he was the perpetrator of the abuse. There are original charges with murder, but later pleaded guilty to a downgraded charge of criminal neglect. Probably should have been charged with murder, would be my opinion. The father was jailed for 9 years. The mother was released on a bond. A lawyer for the New South Wales Department of Family and Community Services, Philip English, applied for a suppression order on the identities of 2 other children the father had allegedly harmed. So this man had a history of abusing young people. There was quite an extensive history in New South Wales, and that history should have been automatically transferred to South Australia so that the South Australian authorities could have been aware of that and made sure that the children, this particular child, Ebony, that was then in his care, was safe. Now, they, on the, he said, now this is in relation to Families SA and the social workers here in South Australia. This is the social worker, I think, that's talking about this. He said that he contacted the New South Wales Child Protection Service and realised the 17-year-old mother, who was a ward of the state in New South Wales, had not been seen by authorities since September 2010. Mr. Barner said he was surprised there had not been an interstate alert. And the issue there is that there is no regulation or authority for one state to release information to another. A state can apply for that information, but if that state knows that someone's moving to another state, there's no obligation because it's state-run, state-based. States have their own rules. States particularly want to look after child protection, but they need to wear the consequences. In this particular case, they didn't do that. So this is a case where it was important to be able to notify other states of what was happening. They didn't do so. Now, this brings me to this current case where a child care, so this is the pedophilia side of it. So on one hand, we've got those kids that are neglected and abused and who die. Chloe Valentine is another one of those children where the department failed to respond. She died at the hands of her stepfather and her mother. But there are these other cases which are pedophilic cases. And there's a third category, which I'll talk about in just a moment as well. So this is 16 childcare case, a case. So this is this one, and this is reported in the Weekend Australian. When was that? Today. Childcare case, a wake up to systemic failures. 9 months before Australia's worst serial pedophile allegations came to light this week, the Australian Federal Police gave Jason Clare a bombshell briefing. And this case is serious because, well, serious because it's pedophilia, but serious because it went on for so long and no one seemed to do or take any notice or do anything about it. The horrifying case raises questions, and this is my question that I'm placing to you today for us to start to think about and to take some action around. The horrifying case raises questions that must be answered about how an alleged pedophile was able to sexually abuse 91 children in a dozen daycare centres across so many years. How could an alleged serial rapist be so brazen, avoid detention for so long, and move between so many different centres without raising red flags? How did the system of childcare safety checks fail to protect these defenceless children? Families of the alleged victims in Brisbane and Sydney have engaged law firm Slater and Gordon to sue centres for compensation, alleging they breached their duty of care to keep children safe. Now, the centres that they're talking about are the daycare centres, and rightfully so, because someone over this period of time must have known or must have had some inkling, or a child must have said something that would have raised a red flag in relation to this particular childcare worker. And the fact that he was able to go from one centre to another and then go from Queensland and work in New South Wales tells us a lot about the inadequacies that sit around this system that allow people, pedophiles, to move from one place to another. And that it is important that we find a way to be able to deal with these particular issues, because we have to find a way to fill that gap. We know what the gap is, and we have to find a way to fill it. And in this particular case, it was so concerning, they went to Clare to be able to put it to him exactly what was happening. And hopefully the federal government will find a way to create a system that notifies one state from the next as to what's happening with regard to suspected pedophiles. But also the onus is upon us as a community to find ways to be able to deal with these types of issues. You and I need to have our antennas up so that if we see a kid behaving in certain ways and wondering where that behaviour is coming from, then we should take some action to notify somebody. Now, it may be quite innocent in many ways. Kids do experiment around things like their penis and vaginas and stuff when they're really, really young. And that not everything means that a child is being impacted by a sexual assault. But what it does mean is that if we're not thinking about it, then the chances are we are ignoring cases whereby children are being sent. And there were so many of them. It is unconscionable that for some reason, no one over this period of time, 12 to 15 years, didn't even notice what was happening. It is terrific, and it's horrible to, I think, even contemplate. The other one that I wanted to talk about was the other side of this coin, which is actually around sexual assault by an adult on older kids. And this tends to happen at high schools, where a teacher who would have to be 22, 23, 24 if they're really young, sometimes older, but they're building up trust with these kids who might be 14 to 18, say, and they start to have a relationship which develops into a sexual relationship with these children. It is abuse. It is sexual abuse, and it's sexual assault. Even though a child at that age may be consenting to it, it is still sexual assault. And there are too many of these older age type pedophiles getting away with sexually assaulting teenagers. And so if you can understand this, there are these three categories. There's the pedophiles that are working in childcare centres and assaulting some of the most innocent and vulnerable people on this planet. And then there are those that are neglecting kids and getting away with that because the system isn't able to track who those people are. And then there are, on top of that, there's the other sexual offender who's sexually assaulting older kids. And there's an example of that that came up which was just last week at Wollonga Waldorf School, which is a school down south here in Adelaide. Advises parents a staff member has been charged with serious sex offending. A letter has been sent to the parents of students at Wollonga Waldorf School in Adelaide South after a staff member was arrested and charged with serious sex offending last month. Police arrested a man from the southern suburbs on July the 25th and charged him with unlawful sexual intercourse. And this is the other area that we need to be so mindful of, that sometimes the older children feel reluctant to report this because they're old enough and mature enough to understand that they have developed what they often see as an intimate relationship with this teacher, this mentor, this person they admire, or whatever it might be, and they don't want to get anybody into trouble, and they feel responsible for this. So it tends to add another layer of complexity, if you like, to actually why these situations are not reported. But again, if we as parents are monitoring what's happening to our kids, regardless of their age, we should be aware enough of changes in behaviour that should indicate to us that there is an issue. And if they're an older kid in particular, then conversations should be had with those children about what's happening to them at school. And sometimes those kids will make comments about people they admire and people they like. And, they're visiting a lot with a certain people, or there's going on camps and there's a certain person there every time they go on a camp. There's lots of indicators that would make us start to think, well, perhaps this relationship isn't as it should be. So the question here is, what are we going to do about all of this? I think what I want to do here in this particular broadcast is to let you know that there are things that you can do. There are report lines, particularly the child abuse report line here in South Australia, and there's one in each state. If you think that it's a really serious crime around pedophilia. There are pedophilia task forces in states and also the federal police. So there's a number of people that you could notify in relation to any of your concerns around any of these issues in relation to children. I hope this has been helpful to you. I want you to think that perhaps if you'd like to have further conversation with me about any of these topics, please feel free to do so. You can do on this particular email address. I have been working in this area for nearly 2 decades now, so it is something that does concern me and I've been advocating for. As a result, I set up the Child Protection Party to help us deal with some of these issues at a legislative level. So, and also subscribe to my channel, that would be really helpful. Let us know what you think. Also put a comment in below. If this has raised any issues for you, you can call Lifeline, and there are other services that could help as well. Thanks everybody for being with me. Take care, look after yourselves and be safe.